This is
Real.
Over religion.
What's up, guys?
What's up?
What's going on? Yeah, right? We'll introduce ourselves. My name is Justin Siegel. I work at a church in Murfreesboro called Family Worship Center as the communications director. Bryce?
I'm the associate pastor here at Family Worship Center Murfreesboro.
I'm Mike Courtney. I direct a group of counseling centers in Middle Tennessee called Branches, and I happen to be a congregant here at Family Worship Center. So we have across the board mix from this particular congregation.
We do. Mike, you being the executive director of a counseling center, I'm sure this past year has been super busy for you.
No.
It hasn't?
I'm just kidding. I'm just messing with you. I always like to answer one question by no. That's not. Yeah, it's been amazingly busy, Justin. I don't know if this is good news or bad news, but in all honesty, we have had in our 15 years of existence, this has been our absolute busiest year, and I think in great part because of the quarantine, the pandemic, and the behavioral health effects on people.
I mean, what is it about the pandemic that had such a strong mental effect on people?
There's the obvious things of anxiety and worry and the imminent fear of death and all of those things. But in all honesty, we have that with us all the time. I don't know that there are any fears that are more pronounced than 15 months ago or 18 months ago. But what has been different about this, unique about it, is that the quarantine has not given us opportunity to vent that. And so we can't talk to anybody. And if we do talk to somebody, they're in the same boat that we're in. Yeah. So they're not empathetically hearing our issues. So I think that has caused a lot of people to just allow this angst to build up. And they have sought, I would think would be a good thing, but they've sought professional help to go outside of the norm and sit down with somebody who can walk them through this, kind of normalize some of what they're feeling.
No, I think that's a great thing. I mean, I would say for the first time seriously in my life during 2020 is when I had what I would say an anxiety attack.
Yeah.
And my sister's dealt with anxiety, my mom has, but there was something about being locked down. And of course, my role, the responsibilities on that role increased drastically, being the air just kicked on. Being the media guy here at this church, I felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. So I'm sure that had something to play into it, but also being far away from family, being locked down, not being able to be with people and talk to people and touch people. Man, we need human touch. And I didn't realize that until it was taken away.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure
for connection.
Yeah. And a lot of people, I'm sure, felt the same thing. They might not have had a history with mental health, right? Or bad mental health, I would say. But during the pandemic, I mean, people were struggling hardcore. And it's good to know that people were reaching out, finding help too.
Almost always, our greatest fear is from the unknown. When we were little kids, and it was the boogeyman in the closet. The unknown is always the greatest fear, and that has been, I think, just one of the keys to all of this is that nobody knows. We don't know for sure do masks work or not work. Is a vaccine the right thing to do? Is it not the right thing? What's my job going to be like? Am I going to have a job? And so the unknown has just been so overwhelming. But we've seen a lot of increase in anxiety, panic attacks, depression, physical abuse. Couples being locked up together in the same house, and just frustration of that. It's been an interesting 18 months.
Now, how do you help people through that? I mean, from a clinical standpoint, how do you help people get through those anxieties, and I mean, even more so the abuse?
Right. Well,
because you can't separate them.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I think not so much. Well, obviously not at all with the abuse, but with the anxieties, with the inner turmoil that's taking place. One of the big things that you try to do always, is what I call normalize that. Is just to say, listen, given your circumstance, what you're going through, that's what you're feeling. What you should feel. That's what people should feel. And then do some problem solving. Give them some healthy tools as to how to handle that. How to get that. My wife and I've been married for 43 years. She ticks me off a lot. We're gonna edit that part out of this, I hope. But having good tools about how do you handle that, and even in a pandemic when you are locked in a house together, how do you? So I think those two things: trying to normalize their feelings, but give them healthy outlets for those feelings is probably paramount in what we do.
Yeah, I was informed. I didn't know this until 30 minutes ago. Dr. Courtney likes to be called Mike instead of Dr. Courtney.
I can't help. I just want to talk
for that. I beg for that.
I just like call him. I mean, I don't have a lot of people I can call doctor. So I'm like Dr. Courtney, like the doctor, like Dr. J.
Yeah. When are you gonna get your doctorate?
I don't know. That's a great question. I would love to get it.
Yeah.
So I think it's in the future for sure. Dr. Harper.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah, I like that.
That sounds
sounds like a surgeon on Grey's
very
Anatomy,
sophisticated.
Is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Sounds better than Bryce Harper, who is the baseball player.
Who is a diva baseball player.
Thrown out for cussing people out.
I know, this is not me, 100%. I love when I get sent videos like, come on, man, you got to have better character than that. And I'm like,
yeah, sorry. My bad, guys. I was just upset by the game. So I wanted to get us together to talk about kind of the church climate has obviously changed. I mean, we talked about mental health was a huge thing that we saw rise up during the pandemic, but also church in general. Like, people weren't able to come into the building. They weren't able to come to church. So I think that had a huge effect. But also just the church seems, to me, in my perspective, like has been changing for the past 10, 12 years. And it seems like the pandemic just kind of like sped that up. So talk about that, kind of reflect on what was the church like before. And maybe you work in a church, you go to a church, you fell away from church. I don't want to say fell away because that has a really bad connotation. Just stopped going. And, for whatever reasons. And we kind of want to reflect on that and talk about that because it's definitely something we've seen change throughout the past year. So I guess to start out, what, in your guys' perspective, what was church like before the pandemic? I guess we'll start with Bryce. What do you think?
Before, it was just normal. I feel like it was something that was just really an accessory, something that was just really kind of optional. And I feel like through the pandemic, there's been like a very significant refining of the church. And the people who are plugging in online, who were even continuing to give through a pandemic when fixed income was very, unknown as far as what that was going to look like for somebody. We saw even just here at FWC during that time, people who were driving to either drop off their check or giving online. And usually when you're not meeting, people just don't give. They just don't give. Right. And so we were continuing to see people give, continue to see people interact. And so there was a refining, I think is just a great way to kind of look at it to some sense, because
there was a church that wrote a whole song about it.
Yeah. And so you really just got to see like the church, the body of Christ, like the people of God just like really shine through and just continue to give. And then just you saw how the church was really willing to adapt and to change versus like, I guess, church can be seen very traditional. And so we had to make a move. Churches across the nation had to make a move digitally. That felt like, no, that's not necessary. TV preachers, yeah, right. TV preachers, all these guys, whatever. And now everybody's a TV preacher, or everybody's got a podcast, or everybody's got a YouTube account. And to me, that was just a very good thing for the church to be able to just try to expand their influence. And, if there's any group of people who should be constantly changing, constantly growing, constantly using methods that are available to advance the kingdom of God, it's definitely the church. You don't want to just get stuck in a certain method, missing an opportunity to just be able to expand your influence for that purpose alone, just to expand the influence, just to get the message out, just to tell a story, just to make an impact. So yeah, there's so much. I don't know if that kind of helps.
Yeah, you
kind of
said
answer that question or.
absolutely. There was a lot of good stuff there. You said that the church did a good job adapting, and I think in the short term they did. But I would say as a whole, like, and when we say the church, we're talking about Big C Church, right? Like Church of America, because that's what we know. But I would say in the long term, like in month 5, month 6, month 7, a lot of the church was like, no, we just want to get back. We just want to get back in the building. We want to get back to normal. And instead of looking on ways to improve on the delivery of the message and how they can build community and how they can be the church outside of the context that they knew, they just wanted to go right back to what they knew. Like, yeah, we were able to adapt to handle this thing for a couple months, but we're sick of it. And now we want to get back. I don't know, Dr. Courtney, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's true in some cases, Justin, and I think you saw other churches that really got out in front of it and continued to be creative and kind of entrepreneurial in different ways of,
which is huge,
of doing things. Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It really is. I think I don't mean to bring an evolutionist into this, but I think, Darwin, there was some truth to what Darwin said, the survival of the fittest. And I think that which may not be a bad thing, that part of what has happened in the church is those churches who are willing to genuinely be the church, to be creative in the way they present the message and to be mission minded. I think those churches have and will continue to thrive because they are out in front of this thing. And the churches that were more caught up in preserving the institution and making sure that we do things the way we've always done it, they're not going to survive. And maybe there's some pruning away in that John 15 stuff where the branches that don't bear fruit, that God's going to prune them away. I think I've seen both, and it's not necessarily a bad thing that's taken place.
So what do you think those churches won't survive? I mean, what has changed so much that those churches aren't able to survive in today's climate if they don't adapt, if they don't evolve, if they don't change?
Well, I think, I think Pastor Bryce was right when he kind of alluded to the fact that some of this change has taken place anyway. I mean, I think what the pandemic has done, I think maybe Tom Rainer said that we are now in 2025, and we would have gotten there anyway. We would have been there in 2025, but now we're in 2021. We're in 2025.
Yep.
The church was headed this way anyway. But I think those churches. I think a couple of numbers. Again, Pastor Bryce mentioned one of them. A couple of numbers that we're just used to measuring is the gathering attendance, how many people are there on
butts
Sunday morning? Yes, absolutely. From a spiritual standpoint, we're trying not to use the word butts,
right?
The souls in seats. That's kind of and then financial support. I think those two things. And I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that if the butts in seats are not going to come back to the same level that they were. Yeah. And so what will follow also is the financial part of that. So I think that those churches who only know how to do the Sunday morning gathering and the focus is absolutely on what happens from the pulpit, those churches are going to, and again, I think they would have declined anyway. But that's going to be more rapid until finally they just kind of fall from the face of the earth.
Yeah, I think I read that same article that you're talking about that Tom Rainer wrote, and our lead pastor had sent it to the staff at the time. Reading it, I think I think he's right. I think we've been seeing a decline of church attendance for a while, slowly but steadily, right? And what 2020, what the pandemic did was just speed everything up. Like you said, we fast forwarded to the year 2025,
Yeah.
essentially.
And we are, we have to admit, we're in Middle Tennessee, and we're in again, the three of us happen to be from the same church, but we're in a great, growing congregation.
Yeah.
So we're pretty isolated from what's happening in the little Methodist church in New Hampshire. This is we're in a bubble.
Yeah, well, it depends on where you are too, because Seattle is still locked down, from what I know. I watched Judah Smith online. I watch a lot of his sermons and stuff, and his Easter service, it was him, his family, and his crew in a studio. They're still not meeting for in-person services, which is crazy because we started meeting
Since June. Yeah. End of May 2020.
Yeah. So almost a year now we've been meeting in person.
To be honest, it's hard to believe that we're even sitting here having this conversation about stuff. Oh yeah, I remember this was a year ago. Wow, we have been in this for a long time.
Yeah,
and you said at the beginning, Justin, some churches wanted to get back to normal. I think we all felt like, let's get this thing over with. This is, and I don't know that we're on the backside of it yet. I mean, this is a world changing kind of event that will forever, in some way, forever change us.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of off the subject of what we've been talking about, but the food industry, I think, has changed forever. Like, they're never going to get back to their normal before 2020 hit. I think you'll always have to wear a mask. If you're handling food, serving it, cooking it, whatever, I think you'll always have to wear a mask, and that's going to be the new normal.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think you'll see a lot more people wearing masks regularly, like you see in China. When you have a cold or you're stuffy, you're just not feeling well, I think you'll see people wearing masks. But then again, we're in Middle Tennessee, where I haven't seen a lot of masks worn in general since everything.
Yeah,
no matter what
I'll die before I wear a mask. Well, they probably will.
I'm trying to find some statistics, some hard cut numbers on church attendance over the past decade or so.
Well, one statistic that I read said that the anticipation is that 36% is what will come back.
Oh, that's not what I thought you were going to say at all. I thought you were going to say, I heard that 35% of statistics are made up.
That's one of my favorite. Yeah, 87% of all statistics are made up on the spot. That's one of my favorites. That is funny. That's like saying there is absolutely no irrevertible truth. Absolutely no. Well, what you just said is true. So if you say that, then that's not true.
There's got to be something. I'm really trying to find this.
How many people have left the church?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's another interesting point, Justin. Is the way we count is different. We don't know. We don't know how many people have left the church.
Well, if you're a Pentecostal church, you inflate your numbers. So.
Yeah.
Well,
and this is coming from a Pentecostal church.
As someone who did not grow up in the Pentecostal church, let me just say that's not unique to the Pentecostal church. Yeah.
Evangelically speaking, right?
We had somewhere, I had a friend the other day, he said, we had somewhere between 400 and 500 for Easter. Not 400 and 500, 4 and 500. So actually, and he went on to say, actually we had 37, but that's between 4 and 500.
He's not wrong. So in the year 2000, it was something like 70%, and now we're down to 47%.
One of the numbers that they talk about a lot, that you hear talked about a lot now, is the increase in the nuns. When they ask people, what's your religious affiliation? And they say none. And that has increased to now, I think I saw a number there that said 21%.
That's between 2008 and 2010.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. And again, all of that is pre-pandemic. So that's happening anyway. Mm-hmm. We're moving in that direction anyway. And now what has happened with COVID-19, it's just accelerated that.
Yeah.
You talked about the nuns, and I think something else that 2020 did we might not have necessarily seen a raise in church attendance or a raise in Christianity, but I think overall we saw a rise of spirituality and people hungry for something spiritual, and this search for meaning.
Right.
I mean, you have the nuns before everything, and you have the people who are straight up atheists, who they don't believe in God, they don't believe in a higher power, they don't believe in any divine forces. They think they're just going to die and lay in the ground.
Yeah.
And it's something. I mean, I'm on TikTok, right, and I see what they call witch talk.
Right.
Scrolling through, you see people practicing like witch type stuff, and I'm not talking voodoo, like satanic rituals or spells or something like that, but people who are interested in crystals and like the spiritual powers that those have, and just finding spiritual meaning within these things, that's considered like witchery. I don't know if that's a word, but it's really something, because I mean, if you've drawn away from Jesus, you've drawn away from church completely, that's one thing. But what was it about the pandemic and about 2020 that really caused people to start seeking things out spiritually and start looking for meaning in the spiritual and not the logical?
I think almost always, and I come from a Christian background. My worldview's been Christian as long as I remember. So it's hard for me to, for me to fully understand what someone with a totally non-Christian worldview thinks. But I still think this is true, that when we are faced with our own mortality, the question of the meaning of life and is this all there is, and those spiritual issues come to the forefront. And so again, this has been a year like no others, when a 23-year-old is sitting there watching television thinking, am I going to make it through this year? Am I going to be one of the statistics? So we've faced our mortality, and so I think it stands to reason that more and more people would begin to look for spiritual answers to that. And I'm a little optimistic. I would say the good news is that if they begin moving in that direction, Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. If they're just moving in a spiritual direction, then there's a good chance they'll find the truth in all of that. And so
well, there's something called common grace that I learned about in one of my humanities classes in college, which is this idea that Jesus will show up in secular works. He'll show up in things that aren't explicitly him, or things that are trying to denounce him, right? Like, that's not beyond God to use the words and to use the works of somebody who is trying to go against God to reveal himself to somebody through those works.
Oh yeah, right.
Like, I think you're right. I think even if they're looking for meaning, they're looking for spirituality in things that are not Christ. I'm praying that the end goal, what they end up seeing, is Jesus through these endeavors.
Right.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think in some of my theology studies, there's like you probably know as well, Dr. Courtney, is there's general revelation and there's special or specific revelation.
Right.
General revelation would be, I'm going on a hike, I see a beautiful sunset, and there's just this moment where I feel like I'm transcending what just time, matter, space, and there's just something that's happening that I just really can't explain. Don't have a relationship with Jesus, but man, there's just something significant that I'm sensing or feeling, and so I think that kind of speaks to like what you're saying,
absolutely.
People have that experience of general revelation with nature or isolation or whatever, and then eventually that leads to a special revelation or a specific revelation where God really speaks specifically to the individual about their life that only he can.
Right.
So,
and gives himself a name to them. I think that's true. We deal with a lot of people in recovery, and a lot of 12-step people, and that's one of the cool things about the 12-step program.
For those that might not know, what do you mean when you say 12-step?
The 12 steps was a program that was started in the 1920s by Bill W. and Dr. Bob to provide some means of organized recovery for alcoholics. Alcoholism was rampant in the roaring 20s, and so this program was established. And they came at it from a spiritual standpoint, but trying to be maybe overly generalistic. They didn't name. So they talk about higher power. Whatever your higher power is, the higher power as you understand him to be. And that's the language of the 12 steps, higher power. But the interesting thing is, as people go through the 12 steps, and your higher power can be a folding chair if you want it to be. I mean, it's just your higher power is whatever you want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But it almost without fail, as people go through the 12 steps, at some point they are confronted, and some guy, it's not uncommon for some guy to come walking in who has never had this thought before and say, you know what? My higher power has a name, and his name is Jesus. I think just moving in a spiritual direction, people tend to find, obviously not universally, but often tend to find the one true way.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's the air kicking on again.
That's general revelation when the air kicks on, and then if it says this is God, then that's specific.
That was perfect.
That was perfect time. It's like God saying
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's the basics of agnosticism, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there is a higher power, but we don't know who or what that is.
Right. Yeah. There might be a God. I just don't know. I can't know it. So yeah. And I always tell people that's okay. You don't have to know his name. He knows your name. So.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Bryce, you said something earlier about personal revelation. Can you kind of define that a little bit?
Personal revelation would be like in, I guess, more recent. Before we came to FWC, Sarah and I were at United Church in Lawrenceburg, doing really well. Felt like we were going to live there forever. Just great community, great church, great group of people. Yeah, this is before a pandemic, so I was there from 2014 to the beginning of 2020. So I came here at FWC February 2020, right before shutdown.
So you brought the pandemic.
Pretty much, yeah. It's kind of like the Jonah thing. Yeah.
It wasn't China. It was you and Sarah brought this.
I kind of got that from some of the staff. Like, ever since you got here, things have been just.
Because you got here, tornadoes hit Nashville, right?
Yeah.
And then right after that.
Yeah, that's
So-
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was very much a Jonah.
It's all you.
Yeah, it's kind of like that was kind of my persona was Jonah. Like, what are you doing? You are out of line. But before that, we were doing really good. This whole opportunity happened with Pastor Eddie and FWC, and I didn't know any FWC, Pastor Eddie, anything. And so once we sat down and we had dinner with them and we started talking to them, I mean, the things that Pastor Eddie was sharing with us was stuff that I had written in my journal.
Mm-hmm.
There was conversations Sarah and I had that we didn't have with anybody else. And Sarah and I basically had like a bullet list of things like, man, we would not move unless these 12 things. And Pastor Eddie literally went down those 12 things. And we didn't share that with anybody. I mean, with nobody. It was just a conversation we had ourselves. And so when we left dinner, it was one of those things where Sarah was like, it's like he was eavesdropping on our conversation. It was like he had our home like tapped or phones or something, and so to me, that speaks to a special revelation or a specific revelation when you go, hold up, pause, hit the brakes. Like, let's think about this for a moment. There is no way he knew that.
Right.
And when I mean verbatim, I really mean verbatim. I mean, we went down the list. Sarah and I are just sitting across there's no telling how we look because we were just thinking we were going to get a free steak dinner because we were just, Sarah's 7 months pregnant. I mean, we were in a good spot. We weren't planning on going anywhere. And then we're leaving kind of with just glossy eyed, like we're about to move to Murfreesboro. Like I cannot believe, because there's a special revelation to this. There's something very specific.
Yeah.
This is not something general. This is not just another opportunity. This is something that God is very much involved in. And because of that, we want to respond accordingly. We want to follow God. We want to, be very intentional of not just following God generally, but just very following him specifically in a special way. And typically when you do that, we all kind of maybe have moments like that where God speaks to us in a special way, in a specific way, and you respond to it. And then there's just like a very special reaping of that. God gets in the details of your life and does something very specific that just really, I think, speaks to the meaning that we're all trying to find in life. That, man, I am not just here just because it was a great opportunity or whatever. Like, I am here simply and purely because God was doing something, and that is very, very evident.
Yeah.
And, to Sarah and I, it was very, very clear that God was very much involved in that. So,
Yeah, that's good.
I love that. And it seems like peace is what was the confirmation, right? Like, that's what I've followed in my life. I think in my own experience and what I've learned personally is that peace only comes when you're in the will of God and when you're following what he wants you to do. But I'm glad that you defined what personal revelation is, because I think what a lot of people hear when they hear personal revelation is they think of something like a Joseph Smith experience, right? Like this extraordinary, this divine or magical being revealed himself to me like an angel and gave me this personal revelation that might not line up scripturally, right? But then you build your whole life and your doctrine around that. And so I like the example you gave. Our family had something very, very similar happen. We had moved to Texas to my family. My dad was a children's pastor, and so he got his first children's pastor's job in Texas. We moved from Ohio to Texas, middle of my sophomore year of high school. Anyway, we were there for about a year, and the pastor at the church we were at the time moved to Georgia, and the pastor had called my dad once he moved there, and he said, "Hey, Vinny," my dad's name is Vince. He's like, "Vinny, I want to bring you on board here as the children's pastor." We'd never been to Georgia. My dad hated Georgia with a passion because he had a bad experience at the Atlanta airport. And so he said, "Okay, God, if this is where you're taking our family, like if this is the next step on this journey, this has to happen. Pastor's got to call us on this day saying that the board approved us as being the children's pastors." And sure enough, like a checklist, I mean, everything happened. It was pretty amazing. It was pretty amazing. So to see personal revelation be something like that, like I can get down with.
I think there are those times where God, Joseph Smith being the exception, where God does really appear and say, "This is the way, walk ye in it."
mm-hmm.
But more often than not, it's kind of that list of, here's what I asked for, here's what God's doing. It has to be God at work in this.
Yeah.
It's good.
What happened to your beard? You shaved your beard, and it looked great.
Really?
Yeah, your
Okay.
pandemic beard looked really good.
I got mixed reviews. And
Who were the mixed reviews from? Was it from Doris?
Some people said it makes you look distinguished. It looks really good. You look real manly. Doris said, "I don't like it." So that's
pretty much it. Yeah.
Actually, what happened is I had planned all along that I was going to grow this beard for 1 year and then shave at the end of the year. So on Christmas Eve, all of our family was over. I shaved, and my 1-year-old grandson, who adores me, would not come to me. So I said, "I'm growing it back."
Yeah.
So I grew it back, and then I kind of phased it out. So now he's comfortable with me again.
Nice.
So.
Yep.
So do you prefer yourself without a beard?
I don't. I was surprised because I've never grown a beard before until this. I imagine this. No self-care. You just get up. You got a beard. You don't have to do it. It's a lot
It's
of
not
work.
the case.
If I'm going to do all this work, I might as well just shave the thing off. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a lot
Was
more
it
work.
was it nice though, not having like the irritating skin from shaving?
This is getting really personal.
I mean, coming from somebody who has a beard right now, and I know Bryce has a beard. I do like not shaving my skin every day. Like I feel like I'm not beating it up.
Yeah. I tell you what bothered me the most is I hated finding food in my mustache like 3 days later. So
3 days. The junk was there for 3 days.
That's right. I remember I had lunch. With Justin 2 days ago.
Like that was Thai food. Wow, it's been a couple days.
Yeah, no, it was more trouble than I
Did
thought it
you
would be.
did you get into it? Did you get like the oil and the beard brush?
No, I
No?
watched a couple YouTube videos. I'm not gonna do all that. So. Plus, you guys are young. Your beard, my beard came in white. It was just white, and I thought, well, I don't know.
See, that's like Gandalf action right there. I wish my beard was white.
Well, give it another 30 years, it will be.
I mean, Bryce and I both have some gray cooking in.
Yeah, I got a little.
Oh, y'all need to do something like Grecian formula stuff.
A little salt and pepper.
This has something to do with the church and the pandemic.
It's got something to do with it. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, I think before the pandemic, and a lot of the church still now that's able to meet in person and not have any, like, I don't know, restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
It's very concert like, right? It was something ever since I've been in church, it's been that, like, everything is for Sunday, and there's a set of songs that we do, and it's a production, right?
Mhm.
Like, we have a production team here at the church.
Mhm.
It's a production, and then typically you get up and you do like announcements or offering, and then it's going to go into something like the message, and you have an altar call, and like that's been the order of service, I think, widely accepted for a while now. What do you think about that model of church? Do you think that still is relevant post pandemic? Do you think that's the healthy way to go? Do you think it's enough?
Yeah, I think always being open to creativity is always a huge plus. I think if you are open to being creative, you can just bring a freshness to everything. For me, I think it's just kind of it's a two-edged sword as far as, I think almost going back into like what is maybe a typical church service, people coming back together for that. I feel like people, that's what they wanted. Like, they just wanted to go back and sit in service. Like, they wanted to hear the songs again. Like, they just wanted to go back to what was familiar and what they were used to. So then there was kind of like, I don't know, a revitalization of what was already just kind of there, where people like wanted that back. And then, but because everything was changing, I think people were also really open to everything just being different. And so I think there's just an opportunity to just make the most of it. Whether it's revitalize what you're doing, make it even better, bring a finer point to it. Whether it's just taking what you have and just sharpening it and making it more excellent, or just saying, hey, we're just going to do things. We're coming together. We're going to do things totally different. And so, with all of it, I think people are just totally open to change, and so.
I think that's good, Bryce. I tell you, here's something that happened to Doris and I. I'll make a confession here, because we were, I don't know, from March till probably, I think we was, because we're old. That was a little later than June before we came back. Probably March to August. We would shop around. We love our church. We obviously love our pastoral team. When it comes to the music, and here's another thing, that music and worship doesn't always translate as well over the internet, and I know that's,
It was a huge struggle for our team.
We were both blessed to have you and felt sorry for you, Justin, that you come in and all of a sudden the whole weight of this is, yeah. And so we would say, well, you know what? We want to hear Pastor Bryce preach. We want to hear Pastor Eddie preach, but let's do worship at, at Elevation Church, or, let's go to Bethel for worship. And I think part of what that does is say, if we better not put all of our eggs in that basket. If we think we are going to reach people because we got a kicking worship team and smoke machines and flashing lights, there's somebody out there that does it better.
Yep.
And now people know how to do that. They know how to, and so I think it does really. I think you're right, Pastor Bryce. We like the familiar, we like the comfortable, but that's not where the draw is. If we're going to reach people, we're going to reach people by engaging them in the mission of the church, not in the presentation, but in the mission. We're out in the streets. We're making a difference in people's lives. So I think I think we may continue to see worship the way it's been, but it won't be the center of what.
Right.
For a while, I think it became the center of what we do, and it won't be that anymore.
Well,
Right.
I'm interested to know how it got there, right? Because it seems
Yeah.
like the early church wasn't concerned in like a performance or anything like that. Daniel's over here doing a dance off camera.
Yeah, that's good.
It wasn't about any of that. I mean, obviously they did not have the technology that we had, but it also didn't seem to me like it was about a specific time, a specific day. Like everything for us seems like it's geared towards Sunday, and like that had to come from somewhere along the way. And the mission of the early church, I think, was to gather believers together to spread the good news, the gospel, right? That Jesus was indeed alive. And I don't know. I've questioned and asked if just as a church, like I'm talking Big C church, if we've gotten away from the original mission of the church a bit by putting so much focus on a day, by giving so much focus to the production and the performance. I think you're right. Like, don't put all your eggs in one basket, because there's different churches that do things so stinking well. But I think there's so much value in smaller communities too. I mean, it seemed to me like the early church, like that was where they learned. That's where they did life together, and I think that's where life groups come in.
Right.
And I'm seeing a lot of who is it? Francis Chan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's completely done away with meeting in a building, and he's got different homes, and that's kind of the church that he's developing, is in different homes.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, and again, I don't have the answer to this. This is just something I've been thinking about. Is that the way the church needs to head? Like, is that the future?
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of people that come in here on Sundays and nobody knows their face, nobody knows their name, right? And then they are just able to leave. And so if church was about smaller communities that met in homes around a meal, and then shared a story of Jesus, or did a short sermon and like a little acoustic set, or they watched worship from one of the bigger churches, like, is that a better model to go for today's climate?
Yeah. I think, you mind if I say something about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Pastor Ross? I think, and I don't know, I'm not a great church historian. I think this development has been more generational than it has been spiritual. I think I am a baby boomer, and we grew up on, God bless me and Ma and our two boys, we four no more. We grew up on our little group, and we want to know and be known, and so church began to look like that. And the generation that followed me was the baby busters, and then kind of all the way up to Gen X, who were here. Let me make a confession to you. Tomorrow or Saturday night, I am going to a Journey knockoff band concert. I have never been to a rock concert in my life.
Why is that a confession?
Never been to a rock concert in my life. Not the going to the concert. The fact I've never been to one. Because I don't want to be a part of a big old crowd like that. Well, the generation that followed, they liked that, and they loved the big production, and so the church began to follow that. And we want to appeal to them, and so let's have great music. Let's do a production. Let's put time. Now, here's what I think, and you all can answer this better than I can. I think that the millennials and the generations that has followed that, Generation Z, I think they have moved back to, we don't like the big venue as much. We want that's why Starbucks is what it is. We like the smaller venue, and so again, we're back to, I think the church was heading here anyway without knowing it. And maybe the good thing that the pandemic has done is it's just kind of accelerated that, to say, building a huge auditorium and putting on great shows to pack the place for 1 hour a week on Sunday morning is not going to be the way to go anymore. We're going to have to find lots of different ways. People are going to be more interested in connecting than they are in the production.
But do you think do we abandon that? Or do we keep that going? And like
Yeah.
you said, give people different ways. Or do we just abandon like the auditorium style altogether?
Yeah. I don't mean to dominate this, but because I'm old, I get to speak my.
Like I said,
Absolutely.
Gandalf.
I think I'm old. Can we put that on pause till I grow the beard again?
Yeah.
I think, Justin, I almost hate to say this, but I think
Say it, man.
we are going to go, and again, you saw this happening. I mean, I think we're going to go to multi-congregations in the church. We have for a long time we want to bring everybody together. I used to, in the interest of full disclosure, I pastored for 25 years, and I tried to have this intergenerational, interracial, interfaith, everybody come together and can't we all get along and
like
love
make
each other?
it heaven on earth in
Yes,
one building.
Yeah. And I think we're going to more and more see churches go to multi-congregational, where we do have probably not as large, but we have kind of the gathering for those old codgers that like to get together and raise their hands and praise God and do that stuff.
Do a
We're gonna
buffet.
Yes, that's right. And casseroles. There's going to be casseroles at every service.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have the house churches for those groups that like to be the smaller, more intimate gathering, and you may have very strong and healthy online churches where a guy sits with he and his wife and their kids, and they're the only ones that are worshiping with 1,000 other people.
Well, there's something intimate about that, I think, too, for the families.
So I think you're going to see churches go to kind of this multi-congregational thing where Paul says, I'm trying to be all things to all men, where we do that on a corporate level as well.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's possible for one single church to do that. Like one single church to be all of that. I think that's where, I don't know, I would love to see the church come together. Like, yeah, we have different denominations, which is based around different beliefs and interpretations of scripture. But I really think if we're going to do this multi-congregational thing successfully, like, we help empower the churches around us as a local church to do what they do best and to reach the people that's good that they're going to reach.
Yeah,
you were going to say something.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things where, the hand doesn't tell the foot, I don't need you, type thing. I think there is absolutely this appreciation across all different methods, belief systems of we need one another. And so I think there's a beauty in, looking at those around us and seeing how to do ministry different, not saying, hey, this is it, sign up or go away. I think there's definitely a beauty in looking at all the different facets of ways that we can make an impact. And again, I think it just comes back to each body, each group of people, each ministry department, whatever, to really look at their demographic, look at the group of people, look at their needs, look at what's going on and their influence, and be creative in that mold and just allow it to be what it needs to be. And so, we can look and say like, man, we gotta get our worship at the elevation level, or we got to get our worship to this level, miss an opportunity to just be our own expression of worship.
Because people might not want that.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's awesome to want to strive and to get excellent and sharpen your craft. But I think there is really a beauty when your leadership and your community, works in a way that is in correlation with the people that you are, overseeing, that you're leading, that you're having community with. And so your terminology, your language, your culture, everything is very harmonious because, again, we're seeing a generation kind of come back in saying we want to connect. We want to do this together. We don't just have this random production experience that's really excellent, awesome, but doesn't really maybe go back to talking about doesn't really speak to a specific special revelation that you would probably get in a community, that you would get in relationship week in and week out. with a body of believers. So yeah, just being authentic, being true to who you are, who God called you to be, the gifts and talents that He's given you, the people that He's given you, and just be creative and have fun and not compare, and honor God and what He's given you, and so yeah, there's just a lot there. So
It's good. One of the things that's going to mean is thinking on both sides of this fence as a former professional minister and now as a lay person, we're going to have to change the way we measure success and the way we value our leaders. Well, in the past, if we're growing, I've said before, I used to say, well, we're not growing, but praise God, neither the Baptists. So, we're doing okay. We're doing as good as anybody else.
Did you grow up in a Baptist church? Is that?
But I think we're going to have to change that. And so the size of the worship service on Sunday morning, the number of people that we're reaching, maybe even the number of people we're baptizing, those are no longer going to be the mark on either side. The pastor can't get up on Monday morning and say, I'm doing terrible because we didn't have, 1,000 people in the worship service. And the layperson can't say, we need a new pastor because we don't see our building full. We're just going to have to change the way we look at the church really being the church and doing what it's supposed to do, I think. Yeah. And it's going to be a hard change to make.
Oh yeah, especially, I've grown up in the church, and that is how you measure success.
Yeah.
Within the church body, and then working in a church. My dad working in a church before me, like you measure it with how many people are there, with baptisms, et cetera, et cetera. But should we get comfortable with not measuring numbers? Period.
Well, I think somebody says you can't expect what you don't measure. Inspect what you don't measure. I think there's always a need to find some kind of metric. Am I doing better? Are we doing better this week than we did last week? Are we better stewards than I think there's some way, but it's going to be different. Those numbers are going to look completely different.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be, I think, something like, I don't know, you're measuring how many lunches you had with individuals, or like
that's good.
How many groups met that week, or I don't know, more intimate settings. I think, especially for my generation and Gen Z and the ones after, like the ones who are wanting more of an intimate experience, you're going to have to record those. And I don't know, if you want to measure those, have them reported to the head pastor or whoever.
Yeah. What if we measure our success by how much money we gave away?
Exactly.
Wow. We gave away 90% of our income this week. It's been a great week. We're doing great. We're almost broke. This has been a great week.
Yeah. I think with a generation so interested in justice and so fascinated with honestly just making a difference, I see that with the students. I see that with my generation. There is a longing to make an impact. I think that for me, and I think for churches at large moving forward, are going to have to look at what are they doing for their community. What kind of impact are they really making for their community, for the needy in their community, for the hurting, for the broken, poverty, whatever the case may be in a particular area in their demographic. What are the needs there? What can we do to be the church, to be an answer, to be some kind of help, assistance in that? Pastor Liz kind of oversees our outreach and putting things together. We do lots of things. Tomorrow there's a group going to Journey Home, helping to feed people and help people in need. And we do that every month. There's a lot that we're doing outreach wise. And I feel like the church is I even said this in staff this past week. We assign somebody like Pastor Liz who has a deep, deep passion to go out in the community and do something. And so we assign that to that person, and that's their thing. They're handling it. They're making it happen. And it kind of almost like alleviates us this responsibility to think, to be engaged. And that's not just with our church. That's just just across Christendom, where we assign certain teams or people, and we just like, we got outreach program. We got an outreach coordinator. Not really saying, hey, we need to be outreaching into our community and making a difference. And to me, man, I see a generation that's very interested in that wants to make a difference and wants to make an impact. And so I think that could be, man, such a great measuring rod for the church to say, we gave this much. We went and, helped in this community that's hurting. We helped this family.
And that's a great point to make. Like, there's a huge difference between, I would say, the generation before us and then this generation coming up, especially, and our generation, that really seem to give zero cares on the repercussions of caring for people to the nth degree.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm going to advocate, I'm going to care for them, I'm going to scream it from the rooftops. And they have a huge tool for that too. I mean, we all do, right? Like, we can now advocate for people to thousands of people depending on our following. And so I think that's a big thing. And then coming into the church world, I think you're right. Like, what if we don't measure success within the four walls and the numbers that we see here, but we measure success on how much we've done outside of the walls? I think that's a great way to kind of synthesize that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we can't focus within the four walls anymore, because people are outside hurting and dying, and they came in the four walls maybe once before, right? They used to be in church, and now they don't because they got burned or they got hurt or, whatever. And so we're going to have to go outside. And I think that's something we've been preaching for a while as the church, but has not been put into action, really.
Yeah.
Good. I, kind of thinking about this, there's three words came to mind for me, Justin, that the church has to confront, and they were deconstruction, distribution, and decentralization. I think deconstruction, we're going to have to simplify the message, and in fact, be aware of the fact that the message is not as important. Theological distinctions are not going to matter as much. But we believe once saved, always saved. We believe in baptism of the Holy Spirit. Those people are not going to care.
Like, who cares?
And so to deconstruct all of that and say, what is the bare minimum that we believe is necessary, and not to shy away from the gospel, to preach the truth of the gospel, but to get it down to its simplest form. And then distribution, again, as we're talking about, that not to get up in a pulpit and expect that 2,000 people are going to show up and that's why I get the gospel message out. It is by far going to be more important that the guy who is there in the pew is well equipped to go out and share his faith with somebody and to minister to the poor, the widows, and the orphans. It's absolutely necessary. And then decentralization, as we've talked about, multiple congregations, but I think that's also true, as you were saying, Pastor Bryce. I'm in a good place now. I'm a lay person. I don't have to do this stuff. We pay staff members to do that. We don't, and we're going to have to decentralize that and say, which has always been true, the responsibility of taking the message of a Savior to a hurting world is for all of us. And there is no central location or central place or even central method to doing this, that we've got to just as much as we possibly can, we've got to see every person as priest and out there proclaiming the good news.
And I think the full-time staff has to create that avenue for people to go to. Like, they got to present the opportunities. And so I think it's definitely going to be trickled down for people to present that opportunity within the church, for people in the church to then go and do and be with other people.
Good. Yeah.
I think there's a huge stigma as well, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit. People who have always been in the church, people who have been raised in the church, kind of having this stigma around people who maybe don't go to church full time, right? There's this idea of be in the world but not of the world, and I think that language has hurt us
Mm-hmm.
maybe in the long run, because it kind of gives this idea of like, oh, the world is something separate from me, and so I can't really immerse myself. I can't interact with it maybe as much as I would like.
Mm-hmm.
And so that in turn has created this idea that like, oh, if I bring them here, if I bring the world in here, that's good because I'm in the world, but I'm not of it. And maybe changing that language and changing the ideology, like, yes, you need to surround yourself with people who are going to feed you spiritually and who are going to help boost you. But at the end of the day, you have something in you that the world needs and like the world is longing for, and everybody around you is longing for. And you're no different than the atheist next to you. You're no different than the Buddhist next to you or the Baptist next to you or whoever. One, we're all on the same team. And like you said, simplifying the message, getting rid of the theological differences and going, okay, we're all on the team for Jesus. So how can we get Jesus to people who need him? And that's the only difference, right? Like there's no difference between you and the chick who's cutting your hair, who doesn't know Christ, who doesn't go to church anymore, who was burned by church, and has denounced her faith. The only thing is like you have something in you that should be shared. And making that the centralized message of the church, I think is going to be huge. And then also just seeing people's needs and not, how do you say, not demonizing people who might be like what we would say in sin, right? Like outwardly in sin or whatever, whose beliefs are completely different than yours, not demonizing them, but seeing them as a friend and a brother because they still have a divine imprint on them. Like they were still created by God, and have eternal value, just as much value as what's on your life.
Good.
And then doing life with them, meeting their needs, having lunch with them, coffee, whatever, being their friend and building that relationship. I think of the church, I think there's fear of being too open-minded and allowing things that are a little like funky into your thinking and into your ideology and stuff like that. But I think if you're a Christ follower, you know Christ, you know Jesus, I think being open-minded can only lead you to opportunities to share that truth, and to give that truth to others. I don't know if any of that made sense.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I
that's
think
really good.
It made good sense. I have this conversation with my sons who are about your guys' age, a lot, and I will say to them, your job is to question and challenge everything I've ever taught you. Your job is to absolutely, take apart anything you've ever learned from me and try to make it better. My job is to make that as hard for you as I possibly can. And so I think again, and I don't know what this looks like, but this multi-congregational church that I'm talking about, there is a place. Now I'm trying to defend myself here. There is a place for the old, stuck in the mud codger who says, this is the way we've always done it, and this is truth. And if you can't love Jesus and have tattoos, that there is a place for that guy to constantly be pulling us back, while the younger person is saying no, that you can. My youngest son was for years a musician on Lower Broad in Nashville, and a great musician, and had an incredible impact for Jesus in that very dark world.
Well, for people that don't know Nashville, what is Broadway?
Broadway is the iconic strip. All the honky tonks are there. Jacob played in the house band at Tootsie's. And Tootsie's, if you've ever seen a movie that's set in Nashville, I guarantee you there was a scene in Tootsie's at some point. It's that iconic honky tonk. Doris and I went there when he had just gotten a job there. Doris, his mother, we went there, and she's heartbroken. Here's her son, grew up in the church, learned to play music, playing the praise band in the church, and now he's playing this godforsaken honky tonk. And we sat there, and he's
Where
playing.
Did we go wrong?
Yeah,
right?
He's playing. She starts to settle down, and she says, she looked at me. She said, "This is not bad. This is okay." And the second she said that, some guy passed out, dead drunk, right at her feet. And she just looked down and just put her hands in her face, started crying. Oh, okay.
Oh,
But
man.
Jacob he played there for probably 11 years. Tootsie's had a tremendous impact, and we would go hear him, and people would come up and say, "Your son's he's one of the most godly men I've ever met. He's taught me about Jesus." I know of people that came to know Christ because of Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
He got a big tattoo. You know, he got his arm, a bass clef on his arm in the shape of a cross, and almost a sleeve, not quite a sleeve, but almost a sleeve. Got this big tattoo. My father-in-law, who was a godly, saintly man, saw that tattoo and just went to pieces. That ain't no good. You can't love Jesus and have a tattoo. You know, because at that point I was stuck in the middle of this argument.
Yeah.
But my whole point is that we need the guys with the tattoos.
Mm-hmm.
We also need the guys to
Yes.
say, "Oh, this has always been truth," and I think that's what the church has been about all along.
Yes.
Is that we're supposed to make each other better. As you said, Justin, I don't know if any of that made any sense, but it seems to come out of that.
No, I think it's so important because, I mean, at the end of the day, we are here because of the generation before us.
That's good.
And we can talk about.
Don't you ever forget it.
Yeah, right. And we're real quick to talk about everything that they got wrong, or real quick to talk about the mess that they handed us, and that's fine. I think it's perfectly understandable to understand where do we need to work from, but we're not really as quick to talk about all the things that we've been given that's been a blessing.
Balance it with the positives.
Yeah, and so it's easy to see the father-in-law who sees a tattoo who is just hot dog mad about it and ready to just send you to hell over it, whatever the case may be. But then what are the intentions behind all of that? You know, I think once you start going back and you start looking at intentions, you start looking at the person who is saying that, understanding, okay, the way he's saying it is not okay, but where is he coming from? And so I think there's just so much value, like you said, Dr. Courtney. I mean, like, it's not one or the other, man. It's all of us together, and so there's just so much to learn.
And I think it's huge to have dialogue with people who have like differing opinions, different generations, or different beliefs in general. Like, have that conversation. Don't just get upset and like voice your opinion and yell it at them. Like you said, kind of have that perspective and be like, okay, where are they coming from? They were taught in church growing up that you know, tattoos on your body were the mark of Satan, like you were defiling God's temple. You know, and have those conversations with them. I think that's a lot more beneficial than just going, okay, well, screw you.
Yeah. Right. And I think in some ways, Justin, that the pandemic makes that more possible. I think we are, you know, we reached this, and I'm not suggesting we have solved this problem yet, but we reached this fever pitch on Facebook and social media and TikTok and all those things, where we are at each other's throats and there's no listening to one another, and
people are canceling each other.
Yes, and all that. And I do think that I now, this is me again being old. I think the media continues to promote that and kind of glamorize that. But what I have seen from the pandemic is that people are saying, you know, I want to sit down with somebody different from me and talk, and I recognize how fragile all of this is. Yeah. And I think that's not a bad thing that's come out of this. And again, the church, I think, would do well to have that same influence. To say, you know, it's not bad that we are that we kind of forced to confront how limited we are in our understanding of things, and let's talk more through what we believe, what we think.
Yep.
What's the answer for is de-churched the correct word? Those who were in church, those who were raised in church, maybe got burned and left the faith altogether because of a bad experience. What's our answer as the church, like post-pandemic? How can we reach those people?
Yeah, you know, if we could figure it out, we'd write a book and follow Pastor Eddie on the television circuit. I think I think we can learn something from our culture in general. And I'm going to open up a can of worms that we probably will edit out, which is not a bad thing. But we're trying to understand in our culture and in our society. Pastor Bryce mentioned the mess we were handed by the generation before us. We're trying to understand what we owe because of the mistakes of our fathers and our forefathers. And so one example is that reparation. Do we make reparation to races that we have historically abused and put down? And yet something is necessary. Something has to happen. There has to be some kind of apology and some kind of overture. Well, in the same way, we're talking about these sissy church members that got their panties in a wad and they went running off, and I had nothing to do with that. So who cares?
And so that's the perspective.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. And I don't know. So I think one of the first steps is, as a church, we need to find a way to apologize and say, you know what, we really did. Yeah. We were abusive in some cases, and we really did mess people up in their thinking and make them feel less than. And so we apologize for that. Again, doing it without watering down. The gospel is the gospel, and the Bible is true. And what it says, the 10 Commandments are the 10 Commandments. They're not the 10 suggestions. They're the 10 Commandments. But still, the first step in reaching the de-churched, as you say, Justin, is to apologize. Man, we were wrong. We did it wrong, and we'd like to have another shot at this. We'd like to do this in a different way.
Yep. I heard a story. There was a I don't know, he's a writer and a pastor talking about a friend of his who grew up in his church, and they had a guest speaker come in. And I mean, hellfire brimstone, go at the homosexuality topic, and in a very brute, very I don't know, not in love.
Yeah.
And so the whole time he said she had been feeling same-sex attraction for a while, had never voiced it, and so she's just sitting there feeling like she's, I don't know, basically in hell already, because that's what the pastor was saying.
Right.
This guest speaker. And so she went to her pastor after church. I mean, just in tears. Hey, I've been dealing with same-sex attraction. I don't know what's going on. And I really need help navigating these feelings. Because the sermon today, I mean, just told me that I'm going to hell because I feel these things. Pastor basically said, there's the door, get out, don't ever come back.
Yeah.
And so stories like that, right? Where somebody had an experience like that, but then years later, right, she's married to a woman, and her wife ends up dying tragically one night. So she calls her local church, hey, I know you probably won't do it, but my wife passed away. Would you do the ceremony? And the pastor there was like, I'm so sorry to hear that. I'm so sorry to hear about your loss. Yeah, we would love to. And if there's anything you need, we got you. And so approaching that situation in love. And I know for that topic specifically, there's a lot of animosity and a lot of angst around it. But I think the answer to that and to the de-churched into situations like that is love, right? Yeah, you've been burned, you've been hurt, and in some ways not even treated like an actual human being. But that's not Jesus. Jesus didn't do that. That was a person or a group of people and who twisted the message of the gospel.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I think, we don't get people to sign up for this because we show them how hot hell is. That's not why I signed up for it.
That's not why I signed up
for it. I enlisted, I gave my heart to Jesus because of how amazing what was possible to be in relationship with Jesus. All of the many things that we see in Scripture in relationship to God, the peace, the joy, the fruit of the Spirit, this example you see in the life of Jesus, his interactions, the way he handles situations, so contrary to everything that we see in culture. And so there's just an opportunity for the church, for the D church, like you said, Dr. Courtney. I mean, every generation is going to get something wrong. They're going to do something wrong. And if they want what's best for the next generation, they have no problem of apologizing and saying, this is where we got it wrong, and this is probably the right way. We missed it here. We were blind. We had these blind spots. And you're going to have your blind spots as well. So every generation has an opportunity to just escalate and to move forward and to progress in the faith. And so there is this great just advantage from every generation to just get that much better, to be the antidote, to be an answer. And so, yeah.
Good. I was thinking about this on the way driving over here. Justin, he asked me to do this about a month ago. So on the way driving over here, I was thinking about this.
That's how it works for me too.
But I was thinking historically and biblically, there have been these great moments of change, of kind of cataclysmic change. And in those moments, all of worship changed. And by the church, all of the way we do God's stuff changed. After the garden, in the garden you walk with God and talk with God, and He walks. And then after the garden, it's different. God just seems to talk to a few people, to Abraham and to Enoch, and to a few people, and that kind of goes until kind of after the Exodus, and after Egypt, then God begins to give shape to this nation, and the worship of God kind of tends to be around the nation, and there are prophets and priests, and so the Exodus is this cataclysmic moment when everything is going to be different after that. And I think, probably both after the cross and after Pentecost, those two things, the worship had kind of evolved to the temple, and then after Pentecost it's the Holy Spirit in the lives of believers, and all of that and so you see biblically these major shifts in the way we dealt with God, and then it changed. And then that continues a couple of times in history after Constantine, when Constantine blesses the Christianity, and so the Catholic Church is really born, and the church. So that's where we started to be the church, and really started to have we were I think God kind of got off of the throne, and the church got on the throne. Luther comes along, and after the Reformation, now instead of going through the church, it's the priesthood of believers. We can go back again. And I would say, because of my newly found Pentecostal community, the great Pentecostal revivals, the Azusa Street Mission, those kinds. After that, church started to look completely different. So it's not without precedent,
right,
that every few hundred years God says, "Hey, let's just do this thing completely different. We're gonna completely upturn the apple cart and do it completely different." I think it's very, very possible that that's what this is. That this whole pandemic has been God's way of saying, you know what? Let's just do it completely different, and the church will take on a whole new face and look completely different, and find better ways of expressing that amazing love, as you say, Pastor Bryce, than we ever would have found had we not gone through this change. I'm not alarmed by what has happened. I feel optimistic about where God's taking us as a body of believers.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, you talk about it anytime you speak. I feel the same way anytime I open my Bible and I read and I go, man, this was written for right now.
Yeah.
This was written so long ago, but it speaks so specifically to the times that we're living in right now. And that is, again, an opportunity for the church to show the D church, or like, man, just look at this, check this out. Like, read it in the context of our life right now. You can read it in the context of the day and time there, and look at culturally how things are going on, And then you start kind of looking in the historical context and our present context, and you go, not a whole lot. There's still a lot of confrontation. There's still a lot of struggle. There's things going on politically and racially, and you go, but this is the way. Like, this is how Mandalorian kind of quote there, like, this is the way. Like, this is. And so, again, just such an opportunity for the church to just show, like, this is what we've been reading. Yeah. These have been our precepts. Have we been showing all those things? No, but like, this has been our ideal. This is what we're striving for. And man, we've missed it here and there, but this is what we're looking for. This is what we're looking to. This is our, hope to become. And just kind of talking about that issue, like you were talking about, Pastor Kevin Wallace, Redemption to the Nations pastor in Chattanooga, he said something very powerful. He said, you can belong to community of believers and become who God's called you to be at the same time. I mean, like, that's how this works. That's good. Yeah. And so it's
not one or the other.
Yeah. Like, hey, here's a list of things. Once you get all these things right, then you're granted access in. But you're granted access in, and in just entering and becoming a part, you can begin to become who God's called you to be. And that's just kind of one of our slogans here is believe, belong, serve. We're continuing to believe in the Word of God. We're becoming who He's called us to be, and belonging to a community is allowing us the opportunity to become. And then next thing you know, we're serving, we're making an impact, we're making a difference through our story, through our testimony, through outreach and things like that. So
good.
And you're right. I almost said Dr. Courtney. You're right, Mike. The church.
Now we're getting it.
The church has had huge moments of change, and the pandemic definitely seems to be one of those. And if we can move forward, I think the job of the church seems to me to be the answer for that given time, right? Yeah. Like, Jesus is using the church as an avenue to be the answer for the world in that climate, and the world changes, like the world evolves, right. Mm-hmm. Problems arise, and we have to adapt and we have to change to be that answer. Mm-hmm. And so for our generation, you're good. for our generation, not to demonize the generations before, mm-hmm. Like you were saying, like, yeah, they did all this wrong. Have respect, understand what they did wrong, move forward and be the right answer for this time, because 100 years down the road, there's going to be something that you did that is wrong for that climate because it's changed. The world has changed since then.
Good. Years and years ago, I read Francis Schaeffer, and this is stuck with me. He said our culture changes in this way. A change is introduced by philosophy. He was a philosopher, so he would think that. But our philosophy about the world changes. That begins to be reflected in our art. Mm-hmm. So we again, to take a thing that you talked about a little while ago, Justin, philosophy began to say that the way we look at sexuality is perhaps not right, and so art began to reflect that. Our television, Hollywood, movie, art began to reflect that. That begins to be reflected in our educational system. Mm-hmm. We start teaching those values. Then the government finally steps in and begins to pass laws about this is the way you handle this, this is not the way. And finally, the church comes along and fights against it. By the time we get there, that battle was lost a long time ago. It changed way back there. Mm-hmm. And again, I think one of the cool things that has happened in the pandemic that I see is there are at least some instances where the church has gotten out in front of things.
They've opened their eyes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And long before philosophers tell us we need to address things this way, the church has said, hey, we need to provide an answer. We need to do this.
Because they're listening. They're not waiting for the world to, I don't know, convert and adapt to the way they're doing things. They're listening to what humans are saying and then being able to move forward with that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's good. That's good.
This is great. This is a great talk.